This story is about my dad, and in 1942. And the story is called Dad in the Kitchen. In 1942, my dad was a machinist and a dedicated union man. He worked his way to journeyman the old-fashioned way, as an apprentice in a shop. His job meant cutting metal on the lathe to the exact 1/100th of an inch, and handling unpolished metal made his hands rough as sandpaper. He liked working at Iowa Manufacturing Company because he was good at what he did. Now he was training an apprentice. Dad could fix anything that was broken and repaired watches and old clocks for a hobby. He built a bicycle for each member of our family by collecting old frames and wheels and anything he could scrounge. I admired my father's manly skills, and so did my brother, who spent more time with Dad than I'd ever done in my life. It was from the short distance between our family's living room and the kitchen that I've drawn the memory of this story called Dad in the Kitchen. Once in a while, my father got the urge to play chef instead of machine man and invaded Mom's territory to cook. This started when he was 11 and my grandmother had taken ill. She asked him to make railroad pudding for the church dinner. It's a very old-fashioned recipe, and he even made the foaming sauce that went with it. From that time on, Grandmother allowed my father to help with special meals. Now, my mother didn't mind Dad's occasional bursts of cooking and gave him some space while warning, "Butch, don't make a mess or you know what'll happen." Well, nobody knew what would happen. It was just something Mom used to say. And when Dad was in the mood to cook, Mom, my brother, sister, and I, we just got out of the way, and we didn't try to help. He didn't wear an apron because an apron on top of overalls was going too far. He wore the AFL-CIO pin on his cap to declare allegiance to the Union, a big title for a not very big fellow. Union men did not wear aprons, no matter what was underneath. Most men were taller than Dad, but not everyone commanded the same attention because of his red hair and clean-shaven look for a poor man. Many of his buddies called him Red, even though he was Butch to everyone else. Dad was right at home in the humble kitchen in our house near the railroad tracks in Cedar Rapids. It was by the Quaker Oats Company, and it wasn't like kitchens in a magazine ad with shiny fixtures on the sink. Our sink had no fixtures. Instead, it had a pail underneath the drain hole to catch the pump water. Our kitchen was for cooking and eating, and barely big enough for that. On rare occasions, we ate Dad's cooking. From my short distance where I was pretending to read, I watched every move he made. He seemed as contented as he was in a machine shop. The first thing he did was sweep the rough floorboards that attracted dirt like a magnet. Even though I was only 12, a broom in my father's hands was a pleasure to observe. I liked the way he went about it, as though he liked sweeping a floor. He began in the corner and didn't miss a spot, moving mismatched chairs and unstable table out of his way. He pulled the broom straws toward him with slow, careful movements so the dust and crumbs wouldn't fly. He collected them into a neat little pile. Dad didn't like a little mess here and a little clutter there. He was meticulous about gathering one pile that was neat around the edges. When every inch of the floor had been brushed clean, he introduced his little pile to the dustpan. He coaxed dirt over the fine edge, moving it back and forth to get anything that might have escaped under the edge. When the floor was free of stuff that lands on floors, Dad didn't just dump the pile into the wastebasket. He let it slide off into the trash, then wiped the edge clean. All of this kitchen polishing seemed as important as the cooking part. Then he returned the tools to their hooks on the kitchen wall, washed his hands, and the real cooking began. His one and only specialty was a hearty meal called slumgullion stew. We couldn't pretend it was a secret family recipe because it wasn't written down on anything. He used our heavy iron skillet for cooking and the wooden spoon for stirring. First, he browned a pound of hamburger while breaking it into crumbles. The sizzle of meat frying caused my mouth to water before the smell even reached my nose. Next, he punctured the top of a can of stewed tomatoes with the can opener and pumped his arm up and down until it cut clear around the edge so the lid was free. The stewed tomatoes were added to the meat. At this point, Dad would say, if that don't smell good, I don't know what does. That was a saying he used for any occasion by changing a word such as, if that don't stink, I don't know what does. If he didn't know what to think, he'd say, well, if that don't beat all, I don't know what does. The next thing into Dad's mixture was a can of drained peas. He set the burner on low and let it simmer for as long as it took for us kids to set the table. If it got too thick, he added another can of stewed tomatoes. Salt and pepper to taste was the final touch. Mom liked Dad's simple concoction, but tried to improve on it by adding chopped onions, fresh corn kernels, green peppers, celery, and macaroni. Dad said, "Juanita, now why'd you do that?" In Dad's opinion, all that extra stuff was an effort to just fancy it up. He added, "Don't go calling your recipe by my recipe's name." Mama said, "Butch, I wouldn't think of it." We three kids knew Mom's recipe was fancier, and it was good. But I could never taste the peas in her version because there were so many other things crowding them out. I loved the sweetness of peas mixed with meat and tomatoes, and the newness of Dad being in the kitchen to cook for us made me love his slumgullion stew as much as I loved him, even though we never said things like that in my family. Good eats took the place of sentimental words. Now this is Dad's version of slumgullion stew. I'll read it slowly in case you want to write it down. 1 pound of hamburger, fried, fat removed with a spoon. 1 can of stewed tomatoes, chunks broken up with a spoon. 1 can of sweet peas, drained. Salt and pepper to taste.